We spent decades going through articles, eyewitness accounts, scientific papers, and of course the results from all those high-tech searches. It all comes down to one creature.
It does.
You asked us for a really exhaustive look at the source material around the world's most famous aquatic enigma, and that's what we're here to do. Today, we are taking a meticulous look at the Loch Ness Monster, known to many as Nessie, or Nyseg in Scottish Gaelic.
And this material, it presents one of the most compelling conflicts in, modern folklore and science. On one hand, you have this rich history that stretches back centuries. It's filled with these really compelling anecdotal story sightings, blurry photos that just captured everyone's imagination, and some very perplexing sonar readings.
But on the other side of that coin, you have the scientific community.
Yeah.
And they're armed with, better and better technology over the years.
Right. And they've provided these counter-explanations rooted in, psychology, geology, outright hoaxes, and just the simple misidentification of animals we already know exist.
So our goal here isn't to solve the mystery. It's to really thoroughly examine the evidence we have. We are going to trace how a local Scottish legend just exploded into a global media phenomenon.
We'll dissect the most influential pieces of evidence, both the facts and the proven fictions.
Exactly. And we'll weigh the scientific conclusions against the sheer powerful persistence of this mystery in our collective imagination.
It's remarkable, really, how the search for Nessie bridges so many different fields. It's a foundational topic in cryptozoology, the study of hidden or unconfirmed animals. But our sources clearly place the scientific efforts alongside studies in limnology, geology, and, as I said, psychology.
We're going to track the creature's timeline from a brief mention in the 6th century all the way through to these modern high-tech searches that were conducted just last year in 2023.
The 90th anniversary searches, yeah.
To properly contextualize Nessie, we have to travel back, way back, over 1,400 years, long before tourism and mass media. The foundational reference point, the one everyone brings up, is from the 6th century.
That takes us to the text, The Life of St. Columba, which was actually written a century later, in the 7th century, by a man named Adamnan. And this text details the journey of the Irish monk, St. Columba.
Okay.
Around the year 565 AD, Columba was traveling in the area that is now Scotland, which was then inhabited by the Picts, and his path took him to the River Ness.
The account itself it's quite chilling. It describes an encounter with locals who were in the middle of burying a man. What exactly happened to him?
The man had been swimming in the River Ness when he was attacked and mauled by what the text calls a water beast, which then dragged him underwater.
It's a really brutal story.
It is, and it's an important point to underline that this incident happened in the flowing River Ness, which connects to the loch, not in the huge open body of Loch Ness itself.
And what was Columba's famous intervention in all this?
Well, one of his own followers, a man named Luini Macumin, tried to swim across that same river to get a boat. And the beast emerged again, coming out of the water, moving with incredible speed and power, ready to attack again.
So Columba steps in.
He does. The account says he immediately made the sign of the cross and commanded the creature to stop. He issued a specific instruction. Go no further. Do not touch the man. Go back at once.
And the result of that command?
The account claims the creature just stopped. It halted its pursuit instantly, retreating as if it had been pulled back with ropes. This allowed the swimmer to get back safely, and of course the witnesses saw it as a miracle.
So that event really cemented the idea that the waters in that area held something uniquely dangerous, monstrous even.
Absolutely. But while that narrative is captivating, the source material also forces us to apply a critical lens to its, historical reliability.
Right. It's not just a simple eyewitness report.
No, not at all. Skeptics point out that this story is found within a hagiography, which is a biography of a saint written specifically to promote their holiness and their power. And these water beast stories were, frankly, standard literary motifs in medieval hagiographies all over Europe. They were often included to highlight the triumph of Christianity over pagan evil or just the dangers of the natural world. So the possibility exists that this is a common story structure that just got attached to this specific location.
And beyond that, the story might not even be original to that time period.
Correct. Research suggests that this particular narrative might have been influenced by much older indigenous Irish myths,
Such as?
specifically the Carnac and the Oilefaist.
Yeah.
These were mythological sea serpents or monsters in Irish folklore, and they could have provided the template for the beast in the River Ness. This really shifts the interpretation from a physical sighting to a synthesis of existing religious and cultural mythology.
So we fast forward through the next several centuries, where the tradition probably just survived as local oral folklore.
Mm.
And then in the late 19th century, accounts start to appear in print, but often decades after the events themselves.
The 19th century accounts act as a kind of bridge. First, you have D. Mackenzie's sighting. It's dated to 1871 or 1872, but it wasn't actually published until the 1930s.
So after the modern craze had already started.
Exactly. Mackenzie saw what he first thought was a log or an upturned boat, but then he noticed it began wriggling and churning up the water. He said it started moving slowly before it just rapidly disappeared below the surface.
Then, in 1888, we get the account from Alexander MacDonald, which has a more specific description.
MacDonald was a road worker. He claimed to have seen a large, stubby-legged animal near the shore at a place called Abriahan, moving about 50 yards away from him.
And he reported it.
He did. He reported it to a local water bailiff and described the creature as looking like a salamander, so a broad, sort of amphibian appearance, which is very different from the serpentine or whale-like descriptions that would dominate later on.
This collection of pre-1933 material is crucial, but Ronald Binns, the skeptical author and a former member of the Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau, he maintains a pretty firm position against these being proof of a long-standing tradition.
He does. Binns' argument is that while these reports exist, they are just too scattered and too often published long after the fact to prove a continuous, widespread cultural belief in a specific, large monster before the modern media age really began in 1933.
So they show localized, odd reports of something strange.
But not the globally recognized cryptid that we know today.
Right. So that brings us to 1933. This is the undeniable inflection point. If the previous centuries were just whispers, 1933 was a global amplification that just fundamentally changed the perception of Loch Ness, and it all seems to center on Aldie Mackay's sighting.
This is the critical moment. On April 15, 1933, Aldie Mackay and her husband John were driving along the newly improved A82 road. They saw an enormous creature rolling and plunging near the surface. The event was documented and published by a journalist, Alex Campbell, in the Inverness Courier on May 2nd.
Let's focus on her description, because this is what really set the standard for the creature's immense size.
She described its body as resembling that of a whale, and the water disturbance was just immense. She noted the water around it was cascading and churning like a simmering cauldron.
Wow.
And furthermore, when the creature plunged back down, it generated waves large enough to have been caused by a passing steamer. This implies significant displacement and, mass.
And this is the moment the name shifted from a mythical water beast or salamander to the monster.
Indeed. It was either Campbell or his editor, Evan Barron, who first applied the term monster to the sighting, and that shifted the narrative from obscure folklore to sensational news. This eventually led to the nickname everyone knows, Nessie, by the 1940s.
Right.
It's also important to note the cultural continuity here. Mackay later acknowledged that there was an established oral tradition of a beast in the loch well before her sighting. So that confirms that while the fame was new, the underlying idea was not.
The timing of this media explosion brings us to that crucial discussion of accessibility. It's often said that the sudden appearance of the monster was a direct result of new infrastructure.
The construction and opening of the extensive road upgrade along the loch in early 1933 is often treated as the catalyst. It certainly dramatically increased traffic, bringing far more tourists and construction workers into constant visual range of the water. More eyeballs on the loch inevitably meant more reports.
Yet, as you mentioned, the source material offers a counter-argument to the idea that the loch was newly accessible.
Yes. Binns challenges this concept, labeling it the myth of the Lonely Loch. He argues that because of the Caledonian Canal, which was operational long before 1933, the area was never truly isolated.
Okay, but the road did change things.
Oh, absolutely. The road upgrade changed the type of observation possible. It allowed drivers and tourists to have these fleeting elevated views across the water, which are often, very conducive to misidentification.
So after Mackay's event, which established the creature's size and presence, we get the sighting that established its modern physical form. The account from George Spicer and his wife on July 22, 1933, is essential because it introduced the idea of a prehistoric reptile.
The Spicer sighting involved the creature on land. They were driving when a long-necked animal, which they estimated to be about 25 feet long and 4 feet high at the body, crossed the road right in front of their car before disappearing into the loch.
That description is almost cinematic.
It is. Spicer detailed a large, slow-moving body with a long, wavy, narrow neck. He compared its thickness to an elephant's trunk. And crucially, he noted it moved with an undulating motion, describing it as moving up and down in the manner of a scenic railway.
And that led him to his famous conclusion.
It did. He said it was the nearest approach to a dragon or prehistoric animal that I have ever seen in my life.
That, quote, combining a dragon, a prehistoric animal, and that specific serpentine neck motion that really cemented the plesiosaur-like imagery that has defined the Nessie hunt ever since, hasn't it?
Precisely. This account, which was published in early August 1933, established the visual archetype. However, the source material presents compelling modern research that casts serious doubt on the origin of that archetype.
Okay, let's unpack that. The 2013 research from Columbia University suggests this plesiosaur image may have been borrowed from popular culture at the time.
They noted that the film King Kong was a massive cinematic hit in London in August 1933, which coincides perfectly with the publication of Spicer's story.
And King Kong features.
It features a very famous scene with a long-necked dinosaur, a brontosaurus swimming and then emerging from the water. The researchers proposed that Spicer's description, either consciously or unconsciously, may have been fictionalized or at least heavily influenced by this visually powerful media spectacle. It provided the template for the dragon-like creature.
So the iconic image of Nessie, the long-necked dinosaur, might have been seeded by a Hollywood blockbuster rather than a genuine observation. That really changes how we view the public frenzy that followed.
It connects the rise of Nessie not just to better roads, but to the mass media distribution of images and the powerful human tendency to fit unusual observations into well-known templates, especially exciting, visually striking templates.
Once that description was solidified, the race was on to capture Nessie on camera. This brings us into the era of photography, where the evidence quickly becomes either a case of misidentification or, in some cases, outright elaborate deception.
We begin with the very first alleged photograph of the monster taken by Hugh Gray in November of 1933. The image is notoriously blurry, showing a dark, distant shape.
So what are the leading theories for what Gray actually photographed?
There are a couple of strong candidates for misidentification. Gray had been walking his Labrador, and some analysts suggest the image is simply the head of his dog retrieving a stick, just distorted by distance and the low quality of the photo.
And the other theory?
More comprehensively, Maurice Burton's 1963 analysis of lantern slides concluded that the shape was consistent with an otter rolling in the water. In the dark, cold waters of the loch, perspective is extremely challenging to judge.
Then there was the famous near collision on the road in January 1934 with the motorcyclist Arthur Grant. That also led to a sketch.
Grant was a veterinary student, and he was quite specific in his description. A cross between a seal and a plesiosaur, scurrying back toward the water.
But another zoologist weighed in on that one, too.
Yes, when Maurice Burton examined Grant's drawing, the second piece of visual evidence, he found the morphology and the behavior to be perfectly consistent with a large otter, maybe startled and scrambling for cover, magnified by the poor light of a moonlit night at 1 in the morning.
Okay, so now we arrive at the image, the one that defined the mystery for 6 decades. The surgeon's photograph of 1934. It's essential we spend some real time dissecting this image and its eventual debunking.
This photograph, published in the Daily Mail and attributed to a Dr. Robert Kenneth Wilson, a London gynecologist, became the undisputed iconic vision of Nessie, a small serpentine head on top of a swan-like neck protruding about 3 feet above the water. Its composition suggested elegance and scale.
Why did this one image have so much power, even more than other, maybe clearer sightings?
Its success was threefold. First, the alleged source, a respectable London surgeon, gave it immediate perceived credibility. Second, the visual simplicity perfectly matched that King Kong-inspired plesiosaur archetype we just talked about.
And the third reason?
Third, and this is critical, the photo was almost always published cropped. That cropping created the illusion of a massive distant beast rising from huge churning waves.
But the reality, as later investigation revealed, was completely different when you look at the full, uncropped image.
Yes, analysis of the uncropped photograph, which included the distant shoreline, was the first nail in the coffin. Researchers realized the object was minuscule. They estimated it to be only about 60 to 90 centimeters, or 2 to 3 feet long.
So tiny.
Tiny. And the ripples around the object, they were far from the product of a massive creature. They were consistent only with small, localized movements, like a child's toy being pulled through the water. The low camera angle also really contributed to the dramatic effect.
And the definitive proof that the image was a fake was shocking, not just because of the deception, but because of how complex the hoax was.
The confirmation came officially in 1994, though details had been circulating since a newspaper report in 1975. The mastermind was a man named M.A. Wetherill. He was a big game hunter who'd been hired by the Daily Mail to find the monster in 1933.
And he'd been publicly ridiculed. Right.
Exactly. He was ridiculed after his supposed footprint findings were exposed as a hoax that involved a hippopotamus foot umbrella stand.
So the surgeon's photo was Wetherill's calculated act of revenge against his former employer. Who were his co-conspirators?
It was an elaborate four-person operation. Wetherill's son, Ian Wetherill, helped out. Maurice Chambers, an insurance agent, handled the logistics. And most critically, Christian Sperling, Wetherill's stepson and a talented sculpture specialist, built the physical prop.
He built the monster.
He did. Sperling fabricated the monster's head and neck using wood putty, which was then attached to a small toy submarine he bought from Woolworths.
The level of detail required, even just to sink the model, is as compelling as the photo itself.
They tested the model's buoyancy in a local pond before they even took it to Loch Ness. Ian Wetherill was the one who actually captured the photographs. They then passed the photographic plates to Dr. Wilson, the London surgeon, who is a friend of Chambers and, in Sperling's account, was happy to play along with a good practical joke.
And Wilson then sold the images to the Daily Mail.
Eat good.
The timeline of the confession is a bit complex, too, which adds to the intrigue.
Sperling didn't confess until 1991, decades later, when he was an old man. He detailed the entire process. The key takeaway from this part of the source material is the sheer impact of a successful media hoax. For decades, the world believed in a creature based on a putty head attached to a toy submarine, bought for a few shillings.
And the final, almost mythical detail of this hoax, what actually happened to the model itself?
Sperling confirmed that when a water bailiff was spotted approaching them on the shore, Wetherill panicked and quickly sank the toy submarine with his foot. So the most iconic artifact of the entire Loch Ness legend, the fake head and toy body is, and I quote, presumably still somewhere in Loch Ness.
An artifact of deception resting at the bottom of the loch. That's incredible. It's ironically now a legitimate part of the mystery.
It is.
While the surgeon's photo cemented the neck, other pieces of visual evidence focus more on the large body, or the humps. And that starts with Tim Dinsdale's 1960 film.
Dinsdale was an aeronautical engineer, and he was completely dedicated to proving the monster's existence. He captured about 40 feet of 16mm film, showing a distinct dark hump moving across the loch. He described it, looking through binoculars, as being mahogany red with a blotch on its side. It seemed to be moving on its own.
This film gained immediate, serious traction because it was reviewed at a very high level, didn't it?
It did. In 1966, the film was analyzed by JARIC, the Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Center, which is a key military intelligence unit. The fact that a defense intelligence organization was examining amateur cryptid footage tells you everything about the level of public and even political interest Nessie had generated.
And their initial report.
JARIC's initial report, based on sophisticated photogrammetry, concluded that the object was probably animate.
That finding must have been a huge boost to the believers. But the source material confirms this conclusion was eventually revised.
Yes. Subsequent analysis indicated Dinsdale likely just filmed a boat. Probably a launch or a small fishing vessel, just in poor lighting. JARIC's initial estimates of the object's size and speed, which suggested this non-typical movement up to 10 knots, were eventually found to be overestimates.
Why a mistake?
It resulted from incorrect assumptions about the camera angle and various cuts and splices in the film itself. The shape seen in a 1993 digital enhancement, the one that suggested a large underwater body, was more likely just reflections from the opposite shoreline due to the low camera position.
Before Dinsdale, the hump shape was also captured in a famous photograph by Peter McNab in 1955.
McNab's photo, which was taken near Urquhart Castle, shows two distinct long black humps emerging from the water. This photo was highly influential after it was published in Constance White's 1957 book, but its credibility took a severe hit when a researcher named Roy Mackall got his hands on the original negative.
And what did Mackall discover about the negative?
He found the original negative was different from the published print. A tree that was visible in the foreground of the widely distributed photograph was just absent in the original negative,
suggesting it was doctored.
It highly suggests the published image was doctored, likely by rephotographing a manipulated print, probably to enhance or isolate the perceived humps. It makes it far less reliable as evidence.
Finally, we should briefly mention the most obviously staged visual evidence, the 1977 Loch Ness Muppet photo.
Ah, yes. This image, taken by Anthony Doc Shields, who is a magician, shows a very crude, almost translucent shape that quickly got the nickname the Loch Ness Muppet.
He claimed to have summoned it, didn't he?
He did. Shields openly claimed to have deliberately summoned the creature out of the water while he was camping near Urquhart Castle. The lack of natural ripples and the obvious staged look meant that, unlike the surgeon's photo, this image was almost instantly dismissed by serious investigators, though it remains a fun footnote in the history of hoaxes.
As the visual evidence proved to be more and more unreliable, the efforts to confirm Nessie shifted from amateur photographers to these highly organized, systematic scientific searches, often using expensive new technologies. This was a really serious pivot in the mystery.
The first true organized response to the 1933 frenzy was the Edward Mountain expedition in 1934. Mountain was an entrepreneur, and he financed 20 men equipped with cameras and binoculars to patrol the loch for 5 weeks.
So a kind of civilian surveillance effort. What was the outcome of that?
Despite all the manpower and dedication, they only managed to take 21 photographs, and none of them were definitive. Interestingly, a film taken by the expedition supervisor was later analyzed by zoologists, who concluded it showed nothing more exotic than a gray seal.
So that demonstrated early on that just watching the loch wasn't going to be enough.
Exactly. And that failure led to the formation of the organization most associated with the long-term search, the Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau.
The LNPIB.
Yes, the LNPIB. It operated for a decade, from 1962 to 1972, and it represents the high point of structured civilian research. It was run by dedicated volunteers and professionals, including the prominent naturalist Sir Peter Scott.
And their method was to set up permanent camps.
That's right. They set up camps, like the one at Achnahannet, equipped with 35mm movie cameras and powerful telescopic lenses. Their mission was to get photographic proof. They maintained watch points designed to cover about 80% of the loch surface during daylight hours.
A decade-long commitment.
A decade, often dealing with extreme weather and countless false alarms. But in the end, the LNPIB concluded its work without any definitive visual evidence of the monster.
Given the loch's infamous depth, it's deeper than the North Sea and its murky, peaty waters, technology became the necessary next step. And the first serious sonar readings actually predate the LNPIB.
Yes, the first notable detection came in December 1954 from a fishing boat called the Rival 3. The ship was equipped with a scientific echo sounder. At a depth of 146 meters, that's nearly the bottom of the loch, the instrument detected a large object.
And it wasn't just a blip.
No. Crucially, the contact was maintained for 800 meters. It showed the object moving in tandem with the boat before it was lost and later regained. This provided objective technological data that suggested a large, mobile target was down there in the abyss.
Then came the targeted scientific sonar studies in the late 1960s, led by D. Gordon Tucker.
Tucker was the chair of electrical engineering at the University of Birmingham. He used Loch Ness as an ideal testing environment for a prototype sonar transducer. His setup was highly precise. It involved an acoustic net, where the sonar device was fixed underwater at Temple Pier and directed across the loch. This system could track moving targets with much greater accuracy than earlier systems.
And what were the results of that 1967-1968 trial?
During their 2-week testing period, they identified multiple targets that showed non-typical movements, especially at depth, including speeds they estimated up to 10 knots. While they filtered out shoals of fish and other known objects, the remaining signals were consistent with large, fast-moving, unusual objects. The data didn't provide, a shape, but it strongly indicated the presence of something inexplicable.
The 1970s then saw the entrance of Robert Rines and the Academy of Applied Science, pushing the technology even further with submersible cameras. The 1972 findings were incredibly controversial.
Rines' team was innovative. They used a Raytheon sonar unit that was linked to a submersible camera equipped with a powerful floodlight. The camera was programmed to automatically snap photos only when the sonar detected a moving target of a certain size.
And in August 1972,
the sonar returned several massive echoes, tracking moving targets estimated to be between 6 and 9 meters long. Some data points even suggested a large protuberance, which proponents interpreted as a tail.
But the lasting legacy of the 1972 search really lies in those highly disputed photographs,
Yes.
particularly the rhomboid flipper.
The submersible camera captured 2 photographs, which Rines' team published after enhancement and retouching. They appeared to show a rhomboid, or diamond-shaped flipper, roughly 6 to 8 feet long, seemingly in different positions, implying movement. This was the visual evidence Rhines needed to support his plesiosaur hypothesis.
But those photos faced immediate and enduring skepticism, didn't they? Especially regarding the image processing.
The criticism was intense. Critics argued the images were so heavily retouched that they were just unreliable. Skeptics suggested they depicted reflections, processing artifacts from the low-light, high-contrast environment, maybe air bubbles, or simply distorted views of the loch floor or a passing fish fin.
And Rhines himself later admitted there were issues.
He did. He later admitted that at least one of the flipper photos may have been manipulated or retouched by a magazine editor before it was published, which further damaged their credibility.
The flipper photo led directly to the famous naming debate in 1975.
Yes. Based heavily on the 1972 and 1975 photographic data, Rhines and Peter Scott, the noted naturalist, proposed the scientific name Nessie rhombopteryx,
Which literally means,
Ness Monster with the diamond-shaped fin.
and motivation for this was pragmatic, not just academic.
Precisely. Their intention was to apply a Linnaean name to classify the creature, which would then allow them to petition the government to add Nessie rhombopteryx to the British Register of Protected Wildlife. If Nessie had legal protection, it would have given researchers greater access and prevented potential trophy hunting.
But a Scottish politician countered this with a famously perfect anagram.
Nicholas Fairbairn. He immediately highlighted that the scientific name Nessie rhombopteryx could be perfectly rearranged to spell Monster Hoax by Sir Peter S.
An incredible piece of verbal wit.
It was, and it immediately undercut the serious scientific intent of the naming. Rhines, never one to be outdone, responded with his own counter-anagram. Yes, both pics are monsters are.
Rhines returned to the loch in 1975 and later years. What did he find then?
In 1975, Rhines got more photographs. One was published as showing the head, neck, and upper torso of a plesiosaur-like animal with dark skin. However, critics quickly identified it as a waterlogged log or tree stump due to its grainy texture and the sediment around it.
And the gargoyle head.
Right. Another photo, famously dubbed the gargoyle head, appeared to show a large horned head. It's vital to connect this to later findings. During Operation Deep Scan in 1987, a similar-looking object was filmed, and it turned out to be a tree stump. It just illustrates how difficult it is to identify things in the loch's dark conditions.
Rhines' dedication was lifelong, but by 2008, his conclusion had become dishearteningly pessimistic.
By the mid-2000s, yes. Rhines noted the decline in quality eyewitness reports and the distinct lack of recent definitive sonar readings. He actually theorized that the population may have gone extinct.
And his reasoning was tied to the environment.
It was. He suggested the animals failed to adapt to temperature changes caused by global warming, indicating the creatures were pushed past their environmental tolerance limits.
The 1987 effort, Operation Deep Scan, was perhaps the largest coordinated sonar search ever.
It was immense. It involved 24 boats simultaneously cruising the width of the loch, equipped with advanced echo-sounding equipment. They effectively created a vast sonar curtain that swept the entire depth of the loch.
And what was the immediate striking result?
The BBC reported that scientists made significant sonar contact with an object of unusual size and strength. Daryl Lawrence, the sonar expert who donated the sophisticated equipment for the search, personally examined the returns. He was categorical in his assessment, saying, "There's something here that we don't understand, and there's something here that's larger than a fish, maybe some species that hasn't been detected before."
But did the final analysis maintain that sense of mystery?
The ultimate consensus was less dramatic. While the original contact was highly intriguing, subsequent analysis suggested the object was either dense debris or possibly seals which had entered the loch from the River Ness. But that initial robust contact during the sweep remains a potent anecdotal piece of technological evidence for proponents.
By the 21st century, technology reached a level where a massive, unknown creature should, theoretically, be impossible to miss. This brings us to the BBC's highly comprehensive search in 2003.
The 2003 search really set a new standard for thoroughness. They used 600 separate sonar beams and supplemented the effort with satellite tracking. This gave them the ability to identify objects as small as a buoy with high certainty.
And the conclusion?
It was decisive. After mapping every corner of the loch, no animal of substantial size was found. The scientists involved publicly stated that, based on the technology they used, the monster was proven to be a myth.
And sometimes, these high-tech searches find monsters that just confirm the role of media fakery in the mystery. The 2016 Kongsberg Maritime search found physical proof of one of the earlier hoaxes.
Adrian Shine's team, using a sophisticated underwater robot called Munin, was surveying the loch bed when they found an extremely large, identifiable structure. It was the remains of the Nessie model prop created for Billy Wilder's 1970 film, The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes.
It had sunk during filming.
It had. The prop was designed with humps and a neck, but during filming, the humps were removed to make it look more subtle. This fatally altered its buoyancy, causing it to sink and then rest undetected for 46 years.
This is where the source material provides its most definitive modern insight. The 2018 DNA survey promised to reveal the biological truth of what lives in the loch.
This was a landmark international study. The team systematically sampled the lake's environmental DNA, or eDNA, the genetic material left behind by organisms through skin, mucus, or waste. The initial goal was to check for the presence of large, exotic fauna.
And what were the major conclusions based on the DNA they didn't find?
The results, published in 2019, were highly revealing in their negative findings. They found no DNA evidence whatsoever for large, deep-water predators like sharks, so no Greenland sharks, or large sturgeons, or Wells catfish.
And most significantly for the popular theory,
No reptilian sequences were found. Professor Neil Gemmell, the study leader, stated with confidence that we can be fairly sure that there is probably not a giant scaly reptile swimming around in Loch Ness.
but the study did identify a massive abundance of one specific type of creature.
European eels. The loch is teeming with them. The eDNA sample showed a surprisingly high volume of eel genetic material, suggesting a very large, very healthy population. This led Professor Gemmell to suggest that unusually large eels, potentially much greater in size than those normally recorded, might account for many of the sightings, especially the long, dark, undulating shapes seen near the surface.
So the hypothesis is based on abundance, even if no extreme specimens have actually been caught.
Correct. The data confirms the eels are omnipresent and numerous, making them the most statistically likely candidate for misidentification, based purely on biology, especially when you factor in the effects of perspective and refraction in water.
And finally, just last year, the 90th anniversary of the modern sighting reignited interest, triggering another highly publicized search.
The 2023 effort was marked by a lot of public enthusiasm and the use of modern tools like thermal imaging drones, which can detect heat signatures from the air, and hydrophones, which are underwater microphones. Despite a massive turnout, the search yielded no conclusive visual proof.
Yeah, the sounds.
The sounds recorded on the hydrophones, which initially sparked a lot of excitement, were ultimately deemed to be nothing more exotic than probably ducks.
So given the systematic failure of technology to find a creature of substantial size, combined with the proven history of hoaxes, the most intellectually honest approach now is to categorize the natural and psychological phenomena that create the illusion of Nessie. The source material is rich with these competing explanations.
We can start with known animals, even those whose DNA presence was later discounted, as they represent historic popular theories of misidentification.
The elephant theory, for instance. That seems entirely based on the interpretation of one key photo.
That theory, first posited in 1979, suggested that the iconic surgeon's photograph was, in fact, the top of a swimming elephant's head and trunk.
And this gained more support later.
In 2006, yes. Paleontologist Neil Clark suggested that traveling circuses, which frequently toured the highlands in the 1930s, might have routinely allowed their elephants to bathe in the cool, deep water of the loch. The elephant's trunk, visible above the surface, could easily be mistaken for a long serpentine neck.
And before the DNA evidence was published, two other large fish theories had significant traction.
The Greenland shark theory was proposed in 2013 by zoologist Jeremy Wade. These sharks can reach up to 20 feet in length, they're dark, and they're known for incredibly long lifespans. Critically, one biologist noted that Greenland sharks have been known to survive in fresh water, so they could have entered the loch to feed on abundant salmon.
And the other one was the Wells catfish.
Yes, a theory supported by longtime Nessie searcher Steve Feltham in 2015. The Wells catfish is a large species introduced to British waters in the late 19th century.
But both the shark and catfish theories were comprehensively undermined by the 2018 DNA study.
Exactly. The eDNA results confirmed the absence of any genetic material from either sharks or large Wells catfish, making it extremely unlikely they exist in the loch in any significant number, if at all. This leaves the giant eel hypothesis as the leading biological explanation.
Let's elaborate on the eel hypothesis, since it's the scientifically favored position for explaining biological sightings.
Well, the European eel is not only abundant, its DNA is everywhere in the loch, but its movement patterns are highly deceptive. They can move with a powerful serpentine motion, and if an unusually large specimen were to rise to the surface, the combination of its dark color, size, and movement would perfectly fit descriptions of the long, dark humps that are reported.
And while the typical eel is only a few feet long.
Professor Gemmell points to historical examples of gigantism in certain fish species when they're placed in unique environments. He suggests the extreme depth and isolation might contribute to abnormal growth, though this remains unproven until a specimen is actually caught.
Beyond known animals, misidentification of inanimate objects or unique natural effects is also a major source of sightings.
This is where we account for the seemingly massive surface disturbances. We often hear about boat wakes. If a small vessel passes, its wake can persist and be mistaken for a V-shaped pattern created by a submerged creature, especially if the boat itself has since disappeared from view.
Right.
David Monroe's sighting of a zigzagging wake, which was witnessed by 26 people, is often attributed to a boat wake.
The most colorful explanation for the classic hump sighting, though, is the decomposing timber theory.
This was Maurice Burton's hypothesis from 1982. Loch Ness has a deep layer of peat sediment, and submerged Scots pine logs trapped in the cold abyss can begin to ferment.
Okay.
Burton proposed that this fermentation process builds up internal gas pressure inside the resin seal of the log. When the pressure reaches a critical point, the gas escapes, violently propelling the log to the surface. As it sinks and rises, with branch stumps sticking out, it perfectly mimics the shape and motion of a dark, rolling hump. The Daily Mirror even published a photo in 1933 of a washed-up, queerly shaped tree trunk they suggested might be the culprit.
Then there is the fascinating link to the region's unique geology. Loch Ness lies directly on a major fault line.
That is the geological theory championed by Luigi Picardi. Loch Ness is situated within the Great Glen Fault system, which is capable of generating microseismic activity and gas releases. Picardi suggests that these geological events could cause massive, sudden surface disturbances that are mistakenly attributed to a living creature.
And this theory even links back to the original 6th century account.
Crucially, yes. Picardi notes that the description of the beast's emergence in the St. Columba text uses the phrase cum ingenti fremitu, which means with loud roaring or with a mighty crash. This could be interpreted as the sound of a small seismic event or a major gas release, the earth roaring, rather than the vocalization of a creature. That noise, paired with a massive surface disturbance, provides a natural explanation for the earliest recorded event.
The role of light and atmosphere is also critical for generating false sightings from the shore.
W.H. Len's work on atmospheric refraction is central here. Refraction can dramatically distort the shape and size of distant objects, particularly at certain times of day over cold water. This can create mirages, making distant, still objects, like a rock or a log, appear to have a raised head and neck, or make a small animal appear enormous.
And he proved this was possible.
He did. Len successfully photographed a rock mirage on Lake Winnipeg that perfectly mimicked the classic Nessie profile, proving the possibility of optical deception.
Finally, we have to acknowledge the sheer power of folklore and human psychology in driving and maintaining this belief.
Banks Sjogren argued that modern monster beliefs are an evolution of older Scottish legends, specifically the Kelpies or water horses. These myths were culturally significant, often intended to keep children and livestock away from dangerous water. As modern society learned about extinct species, like the plesiosaur, the descriptions of the Loch monsters naturally evolved to reflect that more scientific template.
And this all feeds into the sociological conclusion that the monster is sustained by expectation.
Ronald Binns summarized it powerfully. The monster is fundamentally a sociological phenomenon. The core component is human psychology, the ability of the eye to see what it wants and expects to see. If you are looking for a long-necked dinosaur, the convergence of a rolling otter, a floating log, a seismic ripple, and a light mirage provides the perfect psychological recipe for confirming your belief.
Despite the overwhelming scientific evidence supporting misidentification or hoaxes, the plesiosaur remains the creature of choice in the popular imagination. We have to dissect why this hypothesis persists and look at the fundamental scientific challenges it faces.
The visual power of the plesiosaur, originating largely from the Spicer description and the surgeon's photo, is immense. However, when we apply hard biological and geological scrutiny, the theory just collapses almost immediately.
Let's start with the basic biology of the creature that people imagine.
The popular depiction is a creature lifting its head high above the water in a graceful swan-like pose. But the known fossil evidence of plesiosaur osteology, the bone structure of the neck, makes this posture impossible. Leslie Noah of the Sedgwick Museum stated definitively that the neck anatomy makes it absolutely certain that the plesiosaur could not lift its head up swan-like out of the water. Their necks were rigid and designed for underwater mobility, not high vertical extension.
The environment of Loch Ness itself also poses massive logistical problems for a plesiosaur population.
The first is the age of the loch. Loch Ness is geologically young, dating back only about 10,000 years to the end of the last ice age. It was covered in ice for 20,000 years before that. A large, complex reptile population requires a stable, ancient environment, not a recently thawed freshwater reservoir.
Then there is the issue of sustaining a population of massive animals.
Loch Ness is classified as an oligotrophic loch. It's very deep but nutrient poor. Specifically, it lacks the vast plankton and small fish populations needed to sustain a viable breeding population of large marine reptiles. They would starve. If they were to exist, they would need a constant supply of large salmon, which the loch just does not produce in sufficient numbers to feed multiple plesiosaurs over generations.
And the final nail in the plesiosaur coffin relates to their need to breathe.
Plesiosaurs were air-breathing reptiles. They would need to surface frequently, likely several times an hour, to breathe. If a breeding population existed, we would expect hundreds of sightings per day, not the sporadic, often ambiguous sightings we've seen over the past century.
But proponents of the idea, like Rhines and Scott, they did offer counterpoints to try and keep the hypothesis alive.
They speculated on evolutionary adaptation. They suggested that a small population of marine creatures somehow became trapped when the loch was cut off from the sea and subsequently evolved to survive in the freshwater environment, a case of convergent evolution that led to the modern creature. Robert Rhines theorized that the horns reported in some sightings were actually adapted breathing tubes or specialized nostrils, allowing the creature to breathe with minimal disturbance to the water surface, thus minimizing sightings.
And there are newer paleontological findings that partially address the freshwater issue.
That is correct. Newer fossil discoveries, such as those related to the Leptocladidae plesiosaur family, suggest that some plesiosaur lineages were capable of inhabiting freshwater river systems and lakes. This addresses the challenge of salinity.
But it doesn't solve the other problems.
No. Even if they could tolerate fresh water, this finding does not solve the issues of the loch's young age, the lack of food supply, or the biomechanics of the neck.
So to synthesize this exhaustive material, the Loch Ness Monster mystery is a remarkable complex tapestry.
It's an intricate blend of established local folklore, the Kelpie legends, intertwined with predictable natural phenomena, like geological disturbances along the Great Glen Fault and unique atmospheric refraction effects. And crucially, the global fame of Nessie was forged and sustained by human ambition. The widespread, decades-long success of outright hoaxes, most notably the surgeon's photograph, which provided the perfect, marketable image of the creature.
And if we discard the folklore, the hoaxes, and the psychological effects, what remains the strongest scientific conclusion based on the actual objective investigation?
The current, most robust scientific evidence comes from the 2018 DNA survey. That study conclusively ruled out any large exotic candidates like sharks, sturgeon, or reptiles. The massive quantity of European eel DNA makes the giant eel hypothesis the strongest contender. It is the most abundant large life form in the loch, and while the extreme size is unproven, the statistical likelihood of eels being misidentified is overwhelmingly high.
Yet despite the scientific closure from the 2003 sonar sweep and the 2018 DNA results, the enthusiasm for searching, as we saw with the 2023 efforts, continues unabated. The cultural power of this mystery is seemingly impervious to scientific facts.
That cultural power stems from the landscape itself. Loch Ness is deep, dark, and remote. It feeds the human desire for an unexplained wonder that defies rational explanation.
Which leaves us with a provocative thought for you to consider as you reflect on this material. Given the extreme depth and murky conditions of Loch Ness, and acknowledging the demonstrated 90-year history of human error, misinterpretation, and psychological expectation, what is the realistic chance that a hypothetical large unknown creature could possibly remain definitively undetected indefinitely in this modern era of constant multi-platform technological surveillance? Thanks for listening.